The stage lights fade, but the echo of her voice still lingers warm, steady, and alive. Somewhere in that quiet, you can almost hear the rhythm of another time, the crackle of vinyl, the pulse of a drum machine, the sound of a woman who refused to be forgotten. Long before the world called her the queen of neo-soul, she was a dreamer from South Carolina, writing verses on scraps of paper, turning heartbreak into melody. Her story isn't just about music. It's about endurance, grace, and the cost of being ahead of your time. What happens to the women who built the sound but were never truly seen? Let's get into her story right now. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Grab yourself a warm drink, maybe a cup of tea or water, sit back, and let's start this journey together. Before the world ever heard her name, there was a little girl in Columbia, South Carolina, who sang gospel songs loud enough to fill the small church where her father played. Her voice didn't just reach the rafters, it reached hearts. Born Angela LaVon Brown on the 18th of December, 1961, she grew up in a home where faith and rhythm shared the same space. Her mother, Zona Williams, worked long hours as a hospital technician, while her father, Bobby Williams, balanced life as a legal assistant and a gospel singer. Music wasn't something she learned, it was something she breathed. On Sundays, the smell of pressed clothes and hymn books filled the air. Her father's quartet practiced in the living room, and Angie, still in pigtails, would hum every harmony until she could match their tone perfectly. By the time she was a teenager, she was already writing poems that sounded like songs, small windows into her restless, growing soul. In school, Angie wasn't just known for her voice. She was a gifted athlete, earning several basketball scholarship offers after graduation. But even when she was dribbling down the court, her mind wandered back to melody and rhythm. Sports gave her confidence, but music gave her purpose. When the games ended and the gym fell silent, she would walk home humming her own verses, shaping her emotions into sound. The late 1970 brought more than disco and funk to America. It brought a new language of expression called hip-hop. It was raw, poetic, and alive, spreading from New York like a wildfire of rebellion and rhythm. Angie, listening from the South, felt it deep inside. It was more than just beats, it was honesty. It was her. By high school, she had found two kindred spirits, Cheryl Cook and Blondie Chisholm, both cheerleaders who shared her drive to do something bold. Together, the three of them started rapping at parties, skating rinks, and school events. Their voices intertwined with rhythm and humor, mixing soul with street, melody with attitude. They called themselves the Sequence, not just because their birthdays fell in October, November, and December, but because they believed life had an order, a rhythm, a purpose. One night changed everything. The Sugar Hill Gang, the new kings of hip-hop, were coming to Columbia. The girls had no tickets, no money, and no connections, but Angie refused to give up. "We're getting in," she told her friends. "Something good is going to happen." They waited outside until a man, Harold, the group's road manager, appeared. He liked their energy, and when Angie insisted he let all three of them backstage, he agreed. That moment of courage opened a door that would never close again. Backstage, they met Sylvia Robinson, the powerful owner of Sugar Hill Records, a woman who saw something fierce and unpolished in them. "Let me hear what you got," she said. Without hesitation, the Sequence launched into a freestyle performance that mixed confidence, melody, and the kind of honesty that couldn't be taught. Sylvia smiled and said the words that changed their lives. "I'm going to make you girls stars." Their debut single, Funk You Up, became a hit, the first rap record by an all-female group to reach national charts. They followed it with I Don't Need Your Love, blending sass and soul into something new. For a moment, they were living every dream they'd ever imagined. But success in those days wasn't kind to young black women in music. The Sequence would later learn that the contracts they signed had stripped away their rights. The fame they thought they owned was taken by the very system that had promised to lift them. The group eventually broke apart, disillusioned but not defeated. For Angie, it was a painful education. The music industry could steal your songs but not your soul. She went back home, worked small jobs, and started saving money to record her own demos. Each dollar she earned was a note toward independence, a quiet act of rebellion against an industry that wanted her to disappear. In the quiet hours after her shifts, she would sit at a borrowed keyboard, teaching herself chords, dreaming of a second chance. She didn't know when it would come or how, but she believed that the voice God gave her wasn't meant to fade. And it didn't. The same voice that once sang gospel hymns in a small church would soon echo through a new chapter of American music. Angie Stone was just getting started. When the sequence faded from the spotlight, Angie was barely in her 20s, young enough to dream, but old enough to understand disappointment. The taste of fame had been sweet, but fleeting. The same doors that opened for her were now closed, and she found herself back in Columbia, searching for direction. She took whatever work she could find, clerical jobs, odd gigs, anything that would keep the lights on. But even then, the melody never left her. She began writing jingles for local commercials, crafting small pieces of music that most people ignored. Yet inside those 30-second tunes, Angie poured the same care she once gave to a full verse. Every lyric, every note was a reminder that she was still an artist. During this period, she met Rodney C., a member of the pioneering Bronx rap group, the Funky 4+1. They shared the same love for rhythm and wordplay, and soon their creative partnership became something more. The two married in the early 1980, and in 1984, Angie gave birth to their daughter, Diamond. Motherhood brought joy, but also a new kind of struggle. Angie was still young, still chasing the dream she had fought for since her teenage years. The music industry wasn't forgiving to women, especially mothers, and opportunities slipped away. She tried to balance diapers with demos, lullabies with lyrics, and often, exhaustion won. She once said that after Diamond's birth, she couldn't just jump back up and go to work. It wasn't regret, it was reality. The industry moved fast, and she was moving at the pace of life. Her marriage to Rodney eventually fell apart. By the end of the decade, Angie was a single mother. Her dreams dimmed but not dead. In the early 1990s, fate handed her a second chance. While doing session work, she reconnected with local musicians who admired her songwriting. Among them was David Bright, a singer and producer with a sound rooted in soul but open to modern R&B. Their chemistry, both musical and personal, was undeniable. Along with drummer Willie Bruno, they formed Vertical Hold, an R&B trio that gave Angie her creative spark back. Unlike the sequence, Vertical Hold wasn't built on attitude or image, it was about truth. Angie wrote about life as she lived it. Complex, messy, and real. The trio signed with A&M Records, and in 1993 released their debut album, A Matter of Time. The lead single, Seems Much Too Busy, told the story of love lost to ambition, a reflection of Angie's own relationship with David Bright, who was often consumed by studio work. The song climbed to number 17 on the R&B charts, giving Angie her first taste of success in nearly a decade. But more importantly, it proved that she could survive in a new era of music without compromise. Still, it wasn't easy. The group's follow-up album struggled to find traction, and by 1995, Vertical Hold disbanded. Angie was once again left standing at the edge of another closed door. Yet this time, she was different. Older, wiser, and armed with everything life had taught her about love, pain, and resilience. She no longer needed validation, only a voice. Somewhere in those quiet years after the breakup, Angie began to understand what kind of artist she truly was. Not a pop singer, not just a rapper, but a woman who carried the roots of gospel, the honesty of hip-hop, and the depth of soul in one voice. That realization was the spark. The next chapter wouldn't just change her career, it would redefine an entire sound. By 1994, Angie Stone had lived two lives, one in the shadow of lost opportunities, and another in the quiet persistence that never let her give up. Then came the moment that would change everything, a collaboration that would bring her name back to the world, even if it came with a price. In the early days of neo-soul, a genre that blended the truth of R&B with the rawness of hip-hop, Angie crossed paths with a young, gifted musician named D'Angelo. He was only 19, still shaping his identity, while Angie was in her early 30s, grounded but searching for something real. They met through mutual friends in the studio, both hungry to make music that meant something. Their chemistry was immediate. Together, they created songs that carried both tenderness and fire. Angie co-wrote and arranged parts of what became Brown Sugar, D'Angelo's debut album. The record exploded upon release in 1995, ushering in the neo-soul movement and redefining what black artistry could sound like. But behind the success, there was a story rarely told: the woman who helped build it, and the silence that followed. As D'Angelo's fame grew, their relationship became the subject of whispers. She was older, darker-skinned, and unapologetically herself in an industry that often celebrated women who were none of those things. While she supported him through his rise, she was quietly building her own foundation. In 1997, she gave birth to their son, Michael D'Angelo. It was a moment of joy shadowed by heartbreak, their relationship fractured under the weight of fame, rumors, and industry pressure. Once he became a superstar, she would later reflect, people stopped seeing the man I loved and started seeing the image they wanted him to be. When it ended, it broke her heart but not her spirit. Out of the ashes of that pain came a new purpose. Angie signed with Arista Records and began working on her solo debut, Black Diamond, released in 1999. She named the album after her daughter Diamond, a full-circle gesture of strength and motherhood. The record was a revelation. Songs like No More Rain, In This Cloud, and Every Day showcased her signature voice, smoky, wise, and unshakably human. It wasn't about youth or glamour, it was about truth. Listeners could feel her experience in every note, the way her words carried both forgiveness and defiance. Critics praised the album, fans embraced it, and for the first time in years, Angie stood under her own spotlight. Black Diamond went gold and earned her 2 Soul Train Lady of Soul awards, along with Grammy nominations that confirmed what many already knew. She had always been one of the greats. But Angie didn't stop there. She moved to J Records for her next project, Mahogany Soul, 2001. A lush, deeply personal collection that spoke to love, endurance, and self-worth. The duet More Than a Woman, featuring Calvin Richardson, became another Grammy-nominated gem. Each song felt like a chapter from her diary, unfiltered, fearless, and grounded in grace. By the time Stone Love arrived in 2004, Angie Stone was no longer just surviving, she was shaping the sound of a generation. Her influence could be heard in the works of artists like Jill Scott, Erykah Badu, and Alicia Keys, who carried forward the neo-soul legacy Angie helped define. She once said, "Every heartbreak, every loss, it all went into the music. That's why I never looked back." In that statement lies her truth. Angie's story was never about one big break or one perfect moment, it was about endurance. About a woman who kept walking toward the light, even when the spotlight wasn't pointed her way. And as the world finally began to recognize her voice, Angie Stone wasn't just reclaiming her career, she was reclaiming her place in music history. By the dawn of a new millennium, Angie Stone had finally become what she was always meant to be: a voice that could not be ignored. After decades of setbacks, false starts, and broken promises, she had arrived. But she didn't arrive with noise or spectacle. She arrived with grace. Her debut solo album, Black Diamond, had already hinted at something powerful, but her second project, Mahogany Soul, released in 2001, cemented her legacy. The title alone spoke volumes. Deep, rich, and unpolished, just like her journey. From the first note, it was clear this wasn't an album chasing hits. It was a declaration of identity. Brotha became more than a song. It was a statement. In a world quick to judge and slow to understand, Angie wrapped her words around black men with pride and compassion. She gave them recognition when the culture often gave them blame. "You're my brother, strong brother," she sang, not as a lyric, but as a prayer. The song resonated across living rooms, barbershops, and radio stations, becoming an anthem of love and affirmation. Then came Wish I Didn't Miss You, a heartbreak song wrapped in strength. Built on the haunting sample of the OJ's Backstabbers, it captured the ache of letting go while refusing to fall apart. Her smoky voice carried both pain and power, reminding listeners that vulnerability wasn't weakness, it was proof of survival. Critics called Mahogany Soul a masterpiece. Fans called it medicine. It debuted strong on the R&B charts, earning her Grammy nominations and Soul Train honors. But the real success was quieter, the recognition from people who saw themselves in her lyrics, who found healing in her tone. In interviews, Angie often smiled when asked about her sound. "I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel," she said. "I'm just trying to remind people what it feels like to ride." That was her gift. She didn't just make music. She made people remember. As Mahogany Soul continued to climb, Angie toured across America, her shows filled with generations of fans, young women who saw in her strength, and older listeners who heard in her voice the echoes of gospel, grit, and grace. Her stage presence wasn't flashy, it was magnetic. She didn't need lights or choreography, her truth was enough. Then, in 2004, Stone Love arrived. It was vibrant, full of rhythm and joy, with songs like Stay for a While and U-Haul that blended humor, honesty, and a woman's point of view about moving on. The latter earned another Grammy nomination, solidifying her as one of the defining voices of neo-soul. That same year, Angie's presence expanded beyond music. She appeared in television shows like Girlfriends, Moesha, and Lincoln Heights, where her warmth translated effortlessly to the screen. In 2003, she stepped into film with The Fighting Temptations, starring alongside Cuba Gooding Jr., and Beyoncé, a crossover moment that introduced her to audiences who might not have known the full scope of her artistry. But through all the recognition, Angie stayed grounded. She often said she didn't chase fame, she chased truth. And it was that truth that carried her through. Her success wasn't built on marketing strategies or trends, it was built on resilience. Each song was a page of her life, every lyric a lesson learned. By her 40s, Angie Stone had become what every artist hopes to be, respected, relevant, and real. At last, the world had caught up to the woman it once overlooked. Fame had finally embraced Angie Stone, but it came with the same cold hands that once pushed her away. Behind every award and spotlight, there were quiet nights of exhaustion, moments when applause couldn't fill the silence waiting at home. The truth was simple. Success didn't erase struggle. It only changed its shape. Angie's music had always carried honesty, but now that honesty weighed heavier. She had become a voice for love, empowerment, and endurance. Yet she often felt like she was fighting those very things in her own life. The industry that once doubted her now celebrated her, but only selectively. Angie was praised for being authentic, yet rarely invited to sit at the same table as the stars she had inspired. Younger singers, molded by her influence, were called fresh, original, and revolutionary, while Angie's contributions were often treated as background history. It was the quiet cruelty of the business, to recognize someone's value only when they're no longer the focus. She didn't lash out. She simply kept working. In 2007, she signed with Stax Records, the same legendary label that had once given voice to Otis Redding and Isaac Hayes. For Angie, it felt like coming home to the sound that shaped her and the honesty that defined her. Her album The Art of Love and War was both a return and a revelation. Songs like Sometimes and Baby, a duet with Betty Wright, were crafted with wisdom, humor, and that unshakable sense of womanhood that Angie carried everywhere she went. The record debuted at the top of the Billboard R&B chart, her first #1. But even at the peak of that triumph, she could feel the industry shifting again. Music was becoming faster, flashier, more disposable. Authenticity was no longer enough, it had to be viral. Angie belonged to a generation that believed in stories, not trends, and that made her both timeless and, in some ways, invisible. As the years went on, the spotlight dimmed but never disappeared. Unexpected, 2009, Rich Girl, 2012, and Dream, 2015, continued her evolution, each album intimate, each song a reflection of resilience. By then, she was more than a singer. She was a storyteller of experience. Still, there was a quiet loneliness that trailed her. Fame had given her visibility, but it had also taken pieces of her privacy, her peace. Relationships faltered, rumors spread, and the weight of expectations never fully lifted. She once admitted in an interview, "It's hard being strong all the time when everyone expects you to be." Those words carried the weariness of someone who had given everything to her art and was still expected to give more. Yet, even in her fatigue, Angie remained generous. She mentored younger artists, spoke openly about mental health and aging in the music industry, and continued performing with the same fire that began in a South Carolina church decades earlier. There was something quietly heroic about her perseverance. She had turned heartbreak into harmony and loss into legacy. Even when the world wasn't watching, she was still creating, still believing that truth had its own kind of fame. Looking back, it's easy to see that Angie Stone's greatest achievement wasn't the awards or the chart positions. It was the endurance to stay kind in a business that could be cruel. The light that once blinded her now became her guide, a softer glow, but one that would never fade. As the years went on, Angie Stone began to feel the weight of time not just in her body, but in her spirit. Fame, for all its shine, had never protected her from life's ordinary pains. The industry that once applauded her voice seemed to move on again, chasing faster sounds and younger faces. But Angie had never belonged to trends. She belonged to truth, and truth, as she knew, could be a lonely companion. The late 2000s and early 2010 seconds brought new projects, but also new trials. She was no longer just an artist. She was a woman carrying decades of memories, heartbreak, and responsibility. Her health began to waver. There were moments when the stage lights felt heavier, the travel lonelier, the applause more distant. Still, she performed. Because for Angie, the show was never about fame, it was about faith. She often spoke of how the music industry treated women after 40. "They want your voice," she said, "but they forget the woman behind it." Labels became hesitant. Budgets shrank. Concert offers slowed. Yet Angie's work ethic never faltered. She kept recording, self-funding, and touring, determined to keep her sound alive. In 2009, she released Unexpected under Stax Records, a bold, funky album that showcased her versatility. But behind the grooves and harmonies, there was fatigue. Her private life began to unravel. Around this time, she entered a relationship with her manager, Ashanti Graves. What began as love turned complicated. The lines between business and emotion blurred. By 2010, allegations of infidelity surfaced, and the relationship ended publicly and painfully. The breakup coincided with her appearance on the reality series R&B Divas, Atlanta. For many fans, it was their first glimpse of Angie beyond the microphone, a proud, opinionated, deeply emotional woman trying to balance legacy and survival. But reality TV, with its hunger for conflict, twisted vulnerability into entertainment. What the cameras called drama was, for Angie, exhaustion. She had always been transparent, but the editing room turned her honesty into spectacle. After the show, she withdrew from the spotlight for a while. She continued to release music Rich Girl in 2012 and Dream in 2015. But behind those records was a woman quietly fighting to keep her faith. She dealt with health scares, fluctuating weight, and an industry that didn't know how to embrace older black women who still had something to say. Yet, in those same years, Angie's music grew deeper. The polish faded, but the emotion sharpened. Songs like Too Bad Habits and Dream revealed an artist who wasn't chasing perfection anymore, just honesty. She once said in an interview, "I don't make records for radio. I make them for the people who still believe love can survive." It was both confession and manifesto. By then, Angie Stone had already proven everything she needed to. But as she would soon discover, even legends aren't immune to heartbreak or the silence that follows it. There comes a point in every artist's life when the noise fades and the silence becomes its own kind of test. For Angie Stone, that silence arrived quietly, no scandal, no headlines, just the steady hum of a world moving on without her. The 2010 seconds were a decade of contradictions. She was still writing, still performing, still singing with the same depth that had once defined an era. But fame had shifted shape. Music now lived in algorithms and streaming numbers, not in human connection. The audience that once listened with their hearts now scrolled with their thumbs. And Angie, with her timeless soul and unfiltered truth, didn't fit neatly into the new rhythm of attention. Still, she tried to adapt. In 2019, she released Full Circle, a fitting title for a woman who had seen it all, the rise, the fall, and the rediscovery. The single Gonna Have to Be You carried her signature warmth, a reminder that love and endurance could still coexist. The critics praised it, but the mainstream barely noticed. Angie didn't complain. She simply smiled and said, "I'm still here." By then, her performances had become smaller, more intimate. Jazz lounges, cultural festivals, gospel events, places where people listened, not just watched. She carried herself with humility, always greeting her fans with the same genuine warmth. There was no entourage, no illusion, just the music and the woman behind it. But beneath that grace, there were cracks. In late 2024, Angie went live on social media, unfiltered, unguarded, just her and the camera. Her voice trembled, but not from fear. She spoke of betrayal, of disappointment, of feeling forgotten by the very industry she helped build. She revealed health struggles, a bacterial blood infection that had nearly taken her life, and frustrations over unpaid royalties that she felt she rightfully earned. Her words weren't angry, they were weary. "After all these years," she said softly, "I just wanted to be treated fair." The live stream spread quickly, fans flooding the comments with love and sorrow. It wasn't scandalous, it was sacred. For the first time, people saw not the performer, but the person. That video would be one of her last public appearances. 2 months later, the world woke up to devastating news. Angie Stone had died in a car accident on the 1st of March 2025, after leaving a performance in Alabama. She was 63. The reports said it happened early in the morning on I-65, just outside Montgomery County. She had been scheduled to fly to Maryland later that day. The story made headlines across the country. Tributes poured in from artists, journalists, and fans who called her a mother of modern soul. Many admitted they hadn't realized how much she had given until she was gone. The irony wasn't lost on those who truly knew her. Angie had spent her whole life giving voice to others, and only in her absence did the world truly listen. The lights went out that morning, but the echo of her voice remained. Soft, steady, eternal. In the days following her passing, something remarkable happened. Across the country and far beyond it, people began to rediscover Angie Stone. Songs that had quietly lived in old playlists found their way back into the air. Radio hosts played No More Rain and Wish I Didn't Miss You with reverence, their voices softer than usual when they spoke her name. For years, she had been called underrated, a word that once felt like both a compliment and a curse. But now, the world was beginning to understand what that really meant. Angie had never been forgotten. She had simply been waiting for the right ears to listen again. Her legacy stretched far beyond awards and record sales. It lived in the sound she helped shape the lush, grounded emotion that defined neo-soul. Without Angie Stone, there might never have been a movement to begin with. She stood at the bridge between eras, connecting the gospel honesty of the past with the modern rhythm of R&B and hip-hop. When Black Diamond dropped in 1999, it didn't just mark her comeback, it reshaped an entire generation's approach to love, truth, and self-expression. Artists like Jill Scott, Alicia Keys, and Anthony Hamilton often cited her as a quiet force, someone who made it possible for soul to breathe again in a digital age. Even Erykah Badu once said that Angie's voice feels like home. Her songs became comfort to those who needed understanding, strength to those who needed faith. In Brotha, she uplifted men who felt unseen. In Wish I Didn't Miss You, she spoke to women who had loved too deeply. And in Baby and Sometimes, she showed that even heartache could be sacred when turned into song. Culturally, Angie represented something essential about the American spirit: resilience through rhythm. She was a Southern woman who brought her roots wherever she went, never trading authenticity for fame. Her voice carried the weight of church pews, the warmth of old record players, and the ache of stories told late at night. By 2021, she received the Soul Music Icon Award at the Black Music Honors, a recognition long overdue. 3 years later, in 2024, she was inducted into the Women's Songwriters Hall of Fame, an acknowledgement that felt like both a victory and a homecoming. She accepted it with tears in her eyes, thanking every woman who ever had to fight for her sound. Those honors meant something deeper than trophies. They validated a truth she had carried her entire life, that greatness doesn't always arrive on time, but it always arrived. In the years to come, music historians would call her a bridge artist, one who linked past and future, soul and hip-hop, tradition and truth. But for fans, she was simply Angie, the voice that reminded them it was okay to feel. Her melodies didn't fade with her passing, they rippled outward, finding new life in playlists, samples, and tribute performances. Because when an artist gives the world her truth, that truth never dies. It just finds new hearts to live in. When the news of Angie Stone's death spread, the reaction was both immediate and tender. Fans didn't just mourn her, they remembered her. Across social media, thousands of people shared memories of what her music had meant to them. Some wrote about playing Mahogany Soul on long drives home, others about hearing Brotha on a bad day and feeling seen for the first time. American newspapers called her a matriarch of modern soul. Rolling Stone praised her as the foundation upon which neo-soul was built. In churches, clubs, and online spaces, tributes poured in not just from celebrities, but from everyday people who had lived with her voice for decades. There was a certain poetry in how her influence resurfaced. DJs in Atlanta and New York hosted all-night sets of her greatest songs. Choirs performed her ballads with gospel arrangements, blending her words with the same kind of faith she had grown up singing. In London, fans held a candlelight vigil outside a small soul cafe that had once hosted her during her European tour. And in South Africa, local radio stations aired a 2-hour tribute called "The Woman Who Gave Soul Its Shape." For many, Angie Stone represented more than a musician. She was a reminder of what authenticity sounds like. Her voice had carried generations through love, loss, and renewal. It was music for real life, not for trends, and that's why it endured. Academics and cultural historians began writing about her place in the lineage of Black women artists who turned vulnerability into power alongside Nina Simone, Gladys Knight, and Lauryn Hill. They called her the bridge between eras, noting how her work honored tradition while embracing evolution. She didn't just influence sound, she influenced storytelling. In the United States, tributes appeared from artists across genres. Jill Scott called her "our teacher." Common described her as "the pulse of soul's rebirth." Alicia Keys shared an old photo of them together, captioning it simply, "She made space for us all." The global reaction was equally heartfelt. In France, her albums climbed back into the iTunes R&B charts. In Japan, where American soul music has long had a devoted following, vinyl copies of Black Diamond sold out within a week. A Nigerian music journal published a long essay calling her the soul mother who gave every emotion a melody. But perhaps the most moving tribute came from her hometown of Columbia, South Carolina. The church where she once sang as a little girl hosted a memorial service that filled every pew. Friends, family, and strangers stood side by side, singing "No More Rain" together softly at first, then stronger, until the whole room was alive with sound. It wasn't sadness anymore. It was gratitude. In that moment, Angie's journey had come full circle, from gospel beginnings to global legacy, from overlooked artist to eternal voice. What remains isn't just her music, but her message. That truth, when spoken with love, will always find its echo. And in every corner of the world where her songs still play through speakers, on stages, in quiet living rooms, Angie Stone continues to live on. Not just as a name in music history, but as a feeling that never fades. The stage is quiet now. The lights that once framed her face have faded, but her voice still lingers low, steady, eternal. Somewhere out there, someone is pressing play on Mahogany Soul, and for a moment, Angie Stone is alive again. Her story was never about fame or recognition. It was about endurance, about a woman who loved deeply, fought quietly, and sang truthfully. Through every decade, every heartbreak, every reinvention, she carried the same unwavering faith that music could heal, and she proved it again and again. There's a special kind of strength in artists like her, the ones who keep showing up long after the world stops looking. Angie's greatest victory wasn't the gold records or the Grammy nominations. It was the simple act of staying true when everything else told her to change. She once said, "If I can make one person feel something real, I've done my job." That was her compass, not the charts, not the cameras, just connection. That's why her music endures, because it was never built for the moment. It was built for the soul. As time moves forward, her influence only grows. Every time a young singer closes her eyes and pours out a note of truth, there's a little of Angie in that sound. Every time someone chooses honesty over perfection or love over pride, her spirit lives again. Hollywood may not have given her the glory she earned, but the people did. The listeners who found comfort in her words. The dreamers who believed they too could rise again after falling. And maybe that's the truest definition of legacy, not how loudly you're remembered, but how quietly you continue to matter. So tonight, as we close her story, maybe take a moment to remember your own first memory of her. Was it that opening beat of "No More Rain"? The ache of "Wish I Didn't Miss You"? Or maybe just that soft tone in her interviews when she spoke about love like it was something sacred? Do you think Hollywood ever gave her the respect she truly deserved? If this story moved you, if you believe voices like hers should never fade, hit that subscribe button and help us keep her memory alive. Share this video with someone who needs to remember that truth and soul never go out of style. Because legends like Angie Stone don't disappear. They become part of the music that carries us through life, the kind that whispers in the background long after the song is over. Some stars never fade. They just shine where fewer eyes can see.